Chapter 1. Oscar Warren closed his eyes as the airplane pulled away from the runway and took to the sky. He thought back to the events of the last year. Exactly 1 year ago today, Pat Witherspoon had died while in custody at Fort Apache. At the time, Pat was one of the highest-ranking operatives of the Marriage Mutual Assurance Society, or MMAs, a secret company that manipulated gullible wives into spending $1,600 on insurance supposedly designed to keep their marriage intact and their spouse faithful. The company, if it could be called that, was created by Mona Larson, a misogynistic lawyer whose experience with a cheating spouse had thrown her off balance. Not satisfied with her own revenge, she decided to spread the pain by punishing other men in the most horrific ways imaginable. Unfortunately, her thirst for revenge eventually turned into a desire for political control. Not content with punishing unfaithful spouses, she now sought to remake society according to her worldview. To Mona, men were second-class beings to women and existed only to serve the female. To accomplish this, Mona needed powerful allies, and she set her sights high. Working with her shady associates, Mona decided it was time to target the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, who throughout his political career had been known for his womanizing ways. Everything was going his way until Pat was arrested by a joint task force of federal agents and private citizens based at what is known as Fort Apache, an abandoned army base renovated specifically for the needs of the task force. Oscar, the federal officer who made the arrest, was the husband of a woman who succumbed to the machinations of MMAs and Pat's chemical hypnosis. After attending a spa weekend with 3 of her girlfriends, Oscar's wife, Renee, slipped soda into his food in an attempt to control him and ultimately strip him of his masculinity. However, her gullibility, compounded by her own ignorance, nearly killed him. She is now serving a 30-year sentence for attempted murder. After this episode, Oscar was recruited into the task force and has spent the last year and a half helping to take down MMAs. Although Pat was dead, her computer and personal files were a goldmine of information that indicated that Renee, as well as many other women, were merely guinea pigs for MMAS's plan to emasculate American men and reshape society to fit Mona's twisted ideology. According to Pat's diary, several wives were subjected to questionable procedures that included the use of non-FDA-approved compounds used in conjunction with deep hypnosis. The goal was to force the women to comply with any suggestion from MMAS operatives, such as Pat. This explained Renee's behavior after the spa weekend, and her lawyer used this new information in her appeal. But Oscar was torn. Although he still had feelings for his now ex-wife, he wasn't sure he could trust her again. What would happen if something innocuous worked its way into her programs? Apparently, the courts had thought the same and had ordered Renee to undergo intensive counseling with the task force for at least a year to rule out relapses. That was 6 months ago, and aside from Renee's complaints of headaches, things were going well. Pat's files also had extensive lists of clients from all over the country. As far as they could tell, there were at least 10,000 active paying customers. In addition, the files had videotapes of the penalties that would be imposed if a lawsuit was filed. Detailed recordings of meetings with Mona and her allies were also found. No names were mentioned, but a number of initials were used, and it appears that Pat used a form of shorthand that required translation. FL, LS, LS, DA, ML, and NC were the 5 sets of initials most commonly used in the records. ML was thought to be a reference to Mona, and researchers set about searching the internet for anything that might link Mona to anyone else. After Pat's death, Bill Jackson, Oscar's friend, boss, and mentor, said he should take a vacation to be with his children. He did so, and spent a month with his children traveling around the country, starting with Disneyland. For the next 3 months after that vacation, Oscar received advanced training in everything from marksmanship to martial arts at agencies whose existence was kept secret from the American public. After Pat's death, MAs also went into the shadows, not accepting new clients. However, claims from existing clients were still being processed. This meant that the husbands, some of whom really weren't crooks, were still in danger of being kidnapped. So Oscar had spent much of the last 8 months doing what the task force called intervention. In fact, Oscar had just finished one of the interventions and received a short message asking him to meet Bill at the Watergate Hotel in the nation's capital, right now. Which was why Oscar was now airborne and headed for Washington, D.C. Maybe I should write some stories about these interventions, he thought to himself as the plane began to approach Dulles International Airport. I could call them the Warren Files, he pondered. But who would believe them? He asked himself. Chapter 2. Oscar picked up his luggage and was heading for the exit when he saw a man in a chauffeur's uniform with a sign that read, Oscar Warren. He approached the man and introduced himself. I'm Oscar Warren, he said. Who sent you? Bill Jackson sent me, the man said. I'm supposed to take you to Watergate. Oscar followed the man to the limousine and got in. The driver handed him an envelope. This is a room key. The room number is written inside the envelope, he said. They reached the Landmark Hotel and Oscar carried his luggage to the room. As he entered the room, he looked around to see Bill. Sure enough, his friend was standing at the window talking on his cell phone. He waved his hand at Oscar, saying, Yes, sir. We'll be there in about an hour. Good. Goodbye, he said to the person he was talking to. Glad to see you made it, Oscar, he said, shaking his hand. What's going on? Asked Oscar. We're on our way to brief the President and First Lady, said Bill. I hope you remember to bring a suit? Of course, said Oscar, opening his garment bag. Good, Bill said. Get changed, because we're leaving here in 20 minutes. I'll give you directions on the way. Oscar quickly cleaned himself up and put on the only suit he had. He never thought he would be facing the president and had mixed feelings. On the one hand, he didn't like some of his policies, and he certainly didn't approve of his womanizing. On the other hand, he appreciated what the president was trying to accomplish and thought he was often mistreated by the media. Anyway, Oscar thought, he is the president. And how often does the common man get to sit down with the most powerful man on earth? Oscar put the finishing touches on his tie, picked up his briefcase, and followed Bill to the waiting limousine. On the way to the White House, Bill brought Oscar up to speed. As you know, our technicians have been scouring the internet trying to find any connection between Mona and the other people listed in Pat's notes, he began. However, they've run into a few difficulties. It seems that all the photos that show her face have either been photoshopped, deleted from the internet, or tagged by social media. Several techies have been banned from various sites just for clicking on them. We're not sure, but we think NC is a reference to Nina Carlisle's, a very senior bureaucrat in the Treasury Department, specifically in the Treasury Department, which oversees the Secret Service. There's another NC, one Nancy Caputo, a prominent and very wealthy lobbyist working for a women's rights group. Like I said, it could be a reference to one of them, or maybe both. We're just not sure, and there's not enough context in the memos, so we're following up on both to be sure. We think the prosecutor may be Debbie Abernathy, the senator from New York who led the fight to get the congressman kicked out of office. You know, the one who was caught texting with his interns. He disappeared, and we don't know exactly where he ended up, but we believe he worked for Mona after he was removed from office. The others are inconclusive. We can't link anyone with those initials to Mona, and that's not all. We have received information that MMAS may be operational again, and it looks like the president is definitely a target. I know you're not thrilled with him, Oscar, but if he is compromised or hurt by MMAS the way others have been hurt, it could trigger armed riots. As for our briefing, I will be doing most of the talking. Let's not name any names for either the president or the first lady. I know she wants to hear about what MMAS has done to other victims, so I will let you deal with that since you have seen it firsthand. I also want you to use your fancy training to your advantage. Be very observant. I want to know if you see anything that might give us clues. Any questions? He asked. None so far, Oscar replied. Good. Just follow my directions, Bill said as the limo turned toward the White House. Chapter 3. Bill and Oscar were escorted into the Oval Office after the usual Secret Service search. Oscar was watching everyone around him closely, looking for anything that might indicate trouble. So far, he had seen nothing but a group of professionals doing their jobs. As the door to the Oval Office closed behind them, Bill and Oscar shook hands with President Lincoln Skaggs, the most powerful man in the world. Oscar thought he looked a little shorter in stature than he did on the TV screen. His dark hair with gray at the temples looked as tousled as it always did. His handshake was quite strong, giving the impression of a man who worked out a lot. He led them over to the couch in the center of the office and sat down across from them. A door at the side of the office opened, and a petite, blonde-haired woman walked in. Oscar immediately recognized her as the First Lady. The president stood up to greet her, kissing her on one cheek. "Gentlemen, may I introduce the First Lady?" he asked. "Liz, this is Bill Jackson and Officer Oscar Warren. They are here to brief us on MMAs," he said. She shook hands with the two men and smiled. "Nice to meet you," she said in her trademark British accent. Oscar looked back at the woman he was now dating, a woman who, according to all the accounts he had seen, had become romantically involved with Lincoln after the death of his first wife. He was serving as a U.S. senator at the time, and she was a K Street lobbyist working for a defense contractor. Other stories claimed that he cheated on his first wife with her, but this was never proven. She was younger than the president, with an infectious smile on her pixie-like face. The briefing began with Bill laying out some basic information: who and what MMAS is, what they have done, and what the task force is doing to counter this organization. Bill revealed that in his opinion, and the opinion of many others, this group was targeting the first family, particularly the president himself. It appears that MMAS has gone beyond simple revenge and is now pushing a radical political agenda. It appears that MMAS wants to radically change the age-old dynamics of marriage, and they don't mind using illegal means to achieve that goal, he said. And the information we've been able to obtain points to a plot to trap and possibly co-opt the president. "What do you mean, Bill?" the president asked. "Please don't be politically correct. I need to know what we're up against." "Very well, Mr. President," said Bill. "MMAS wants to completely change the concept of marriage and the whole dynamic of the relationship between a man and a woman. Instead of a relationship in which husband and wife are supposedly equal partners in a lifelong relationship, MAS wants a female-dominated relationship in which men are nothing more than chattel to their spouses. And they want that dynamic to become the norm throughout society. I know there are those who choose that type of relationship, and they are certainly free to do so, as are those who seek same relationships. But MAS wants to change all of society to reflect a radicalized form of this extremely militant ideal," he added. "They see you as a threat to that. The past administration was open to their ideology, and they enjoyed power and a fair amount of taxpayer funds, and they know you're not as open to what they represent." At this point, Oscar interjected into the conversation. "Mr. President, let me explain what happened to me. Maybe this will help clear things up," he said. "Please, Officer Warren," the president said. "After MMAS ended my wife's life, she became part of a conspiracy to emasculate me with a drug designed to make me malleable to my wife's desires. Pat, an MMAS operative who worked with my wife, made her seek a relationship in which I would become a willing and weak cuckold. A man incapable of activity yet happy to indulge in her actions," Oscar said. After Oscar finished his story, both the president and the first lady looked shocked. "And you think this is what they have in store for me?" the president asked. "We have every reason to believe that you are a direct target, and yes, we are concerned that this could happen to you," Bill said. "I don't need to explain the potential consequences if that happens." Lincoln Skaggs thought for a few moments before he spoke. "Mr. Jackson," he said, turning to Bill, "I want to thank you for bringing this to my attention. I would like Officer Warren to stay here for a while as our guest and get to the bottom of this." The president turned to Oscar. "I would appreciate it if you would stay here at the White House while you conduct your investigation, Officer Warren. I'll make sure you have the access and assistance you'll need." He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting, and shook hands with Bill and Oscar. Liz followed suit. "Gentlemen," he said, "I can't thank you enough. Officer Warren, my wife will see to your accommodations. I understand you have a suite at the Watergate. Pack your gear, and we'll get you set up here. Bill, we'll be in touch. Thanks again to both of you. Chapter 4.
And now,
Bill and Oscar discussed the meeting on the way back to Watergate. What's your impression, Oscar? Asked Bill. I think the president is in immediate danger, said Oscar. Bill's eyes widened. What makes you think that? He asked. Did you see the First Lady's reaction to my description of the punishment? Do you think that's why she said about an ordinary day in Washington? Asked Bill. Oscar nodded. Yes. I think it was a way to relieve the tension she was feeling at the moment. Bill, did you know that there are 2 sets of initials in Pat's records that no one has been able to connect to a real name? What if those initials don't always reflect a name? What if sometimes they indicate a title? Asked Oscar. What are you saying? Asked Bill in response. What if FL actually stands for First Lady? LS could easily refer to Liz Skaggs. Yes, her full name is Elizabeth, but you know she prefers to address us as Liz. What Oscar said made Bill's eyes widen. Oh my God, he said. You think the First Lady has something to do with MMAs? If that's true, then the president really is in danger. And you, being there, are potentially in danger as well. Oscar nodded in agreement. It's entirely possible, so I'll be watching her like a hawk, Oscar said. Let's get the techs and researchers on the case right now, he added, pulling out his phone. Bill nodded as Oscar dialed the number for the research department. He called the access code and was instantly connected to the head researcher. John Harding here. Is that you, Oscar? Said the voice on the other end of the wire. Yes, John, Oscar replied. Listen, I need you to do something with everything you have on the initials from Pat's records and files. Let's assume that the initials FL stand for First Lady and LS stands for Liz Skaggs. After you do that, dig around on the internet and see what you can find. Can you do that? Of course we can do that, Oscar. Anything for you, John said. I appreciate that, John, Oscar said. How soon can you provide me with the results? Give me a couple hours. I'll send the results via secure email, John said. Great, John. Thanks, Oscar said, and hung up. He looked at Bill. Looks like we'll know one or the other in a couple hours. Listen, Oscar, I'm going to put together a reserve squad of agents that will be at your disposal while you're in the White House. I know the head of the White House Secret Service personally, so I'll make arrangements with him. He's not going to like it very much, but it's too damn bad. We won't let them on the grounds unless they are needed, but I want to make sure nothing prevents them from coming in if the need arises, Bill said. Bill and Oscar decided to stop for lunch before heading back to the Watergate. Liz Skaggs, meanwhile, was calling on one of her phones from the relative safety of her office in the White House. Hey, sis, said the female voice on the other end. How are you doing? Did you meet with the infamous Oscar Warren? Yes, I did, and with his boss, Bill Jackson, Liz replied. So what do you think? Is Oscar as nice a guy as Pat said he was? I think so, yes. Pretty old-fashioned, if you want my opinion. But tonight we're going to find out just how good he is. He's going to stay here with us for a while. I plan to put him in the Lincoln bedroom. Maybe I'll start moving with him and see how he reacts, Liz said. The woman on the other end of the wire laughed. How much do you think they know? She asked Liz. They seem to know quite a bit, but I'm not sure exactly how much. I know they're frustrated because they can't get any pictures of you, and they still haven't figured out who's on the board of directors. They understand our plans perfectly well, though, at least from their perspective. I'll know more in the next day or so, Liz said. Good. In the meantime, try to find out where they're based. I'd really like to burn their base to the ground. Along with them, the woman on the other end of the wire said. Liz laughed. I'll try, she said. That's all I'm asking. In the meantime, I'll call Nina and see what we can do about his security. Sounds like a plan. See you soon, sis, Liz said. Finished talking, the First Lady put the phone away and began absent-mindedly stroking her crotch, thinking about how she would seduce the man responsible for the latest MMA's debacle. This is going to be fun, she thought. Chapter 5. Bill and Oscar finally made it back to the Watergate, having enjoyed their lunch. Oscar was just packing his things when the phone rang. Oscar, it's John, said a very excited voice on the other end. You won't believe what we've come up with. Spit it out, man, Oscar said. So let's get started. Elizabeth Skaggs's maiden name is Daltrey. She was born in London with her twin sister Monique. We checked immigration records and found out that Monique shortened her name to Mona before she got her student visa. Mona went to Harvard and, after graduating from law school there, became a naturalized citizen and went to work at a very prestigious law firm, where she met and married Andrew Larson, John says. A few years later, they divorced. From everything we've been able to find out, it appears that both sisters were very close. So what you're saying is that, began Oscar. Mona Larson and Liz Skaggs are twin sisters, Oscar, said John. Your instincts were right. It looks like FL and LS are probably the same person. Oscar thought for a moment before replying. Oh, shit, he finally said. Keep digging, John. See what else you can find. Nice work, by the way. Thanks, Oscar, John said before hanging up. He turned to Bill, who sensed something was up. We've had some breakthrough, Oscar said. It appears that Mona Larson and the First Lady are twin sisters. That means you and the President are in even more danger than we thought, Bill said. I'll contact my contacts in the Secret Service. We need to be very careful going forward. They discussed their options, and Oscar headed back to the White House. There he was met by Liz and escorted to the Lincoln bedroom, a room on the second floor of the White House that is part of the suite that includes Lincoln's bathroom and living room. Oscar knew enough history to know that Lincoln never slept in this room, but once used it as a study. Some of the furniture in the room was used by the Lincoln administration, and the centerpiece of the room, a giant 8-foot by 6-foot rosewood bed with a huge headboard and carved footboard, was first purchased by Mary Todd Lincoln in the 1860s. There is no evidence that a president ever slept on it, but it is believed to have been used by other presidents. Oscar also recalled that Rush Limbaugh said he once stayed in this room during one of the Bush administrations and looked around, half expecting to see a bronze plaque that read, Rush Limbaugh slept here. I hope you enjoy living here, Liz said with a smile as Oscar put his clothes away in his closet. You know it's considered an honor to stay in this room, but honestly, sometimes I get goosebumps. I'm sure there's a lot of history in this room, Oscar said. You're probably right, Liz said. At least you'll be sleeping on a new mattress. The old one was pretty linty, so I had it replaced. I hope you approve of it. I decided to modernize it a bit by getting one of those mattresses that allow you to adjust the comfort. That's very nice of you, Mrs. Skaggs. I'm sure it will work just fine. Thank you, Oscar said. Please call me Liz, Oscar, she said. Okay, Liz, Oscar replied. Liz sat down on the bed, tucking her legs under her. So tell me, Oscar, what do you usually do during these interventions you've been telling us about? Do you actually help men cheat on their wives? She asked. No, we don't help anyone to commit adultery, Oscar replied sarcastically. Every intervention is different because every situation is different. Sometimes just giving friendly advice is enough and the affair is over. No cheating, no punishment. Other times, we have to take more direct action. And there are times when we have to play the role of not only marriage counselor, but also law enforcement officer. Interesting, Liz said. I see you carry a gun. Have you ever had to kill someone? Oscar didn't like the tone of her question, but knowing she was in league with Mona, he figured he could bother her a little. Like I said, we're trained law enforcement officers, so there are times when deadly force is required to protect a targeted spouse, he said. As for me, yes, from time to time I have to resort to drastic measures. I don't like it, but if it's necessary, he began, and finished his thought with a hand gesture indicating that he would shoot if necessary. I see, Liz said quietly. After a somewhat pregnant pause, she spoke again. What about your personal life, Oscar? Are you dating anyone special now that you're divorced? The only special people in my life right now are my children, Oscar said. I'm not dating another woman, if that's what you're asking. And no, I have not been with another woman since my divorce. Call me old-fashioned if you want, but I have my reasons. Oh my God, so you haven't been with a woman in a year and a half? She asked. I'm sorry, but I find that hard to believe. I don't know any man who can go that long without having fun. I know that sounds strange, but it's true. For starters, I still have feelings for my wife, and I'm not sure how that's going to end. Call me crazy, but I believe in the wedding vows of till death do you part. And then there are my children. I want to be able to look them in the eye and honestly say that I had no one but their mother. And finally, there's work. Not only does it take up a lot of my time, but it also makes me wary of finding new relationships. You'd be surprised how much garbage I've seen, he said. But didn't your wife try to kill you? Asked Liz. Yes, she tried, said Oscar. She was also under the influence and control of her MMAs, operative at the time. So you blame MMAs for what happened to you, said Liz. Absolutely, Oscar said. And that's why Mona Larson and her accomplices should be brought to justice. There's no telling how many other people she and her accomplices have harmed. Liz frowned at that remark. And now it looks like she's targeting your husband. Who knows? Maybe she's using you the same way her operative used my wife. A look of concern, or guilt, flashed across her face, and she quickly changed the subject. Where are your children now? She asked. At home. They're in good hands, by the way, and I talk to them every day, Oscar said. And where is home, if I may ask? Liz asked. Oscar immediately realized that she was trying to get him to reveal the location of Fort Apache, his base of operations. Someplace safe, he said, noticing the disappointment on her face. He decided to change the subject. What about you, Liz? What brings you here besides being married to the most powerful man on earth? What's your story? Asked Oscar. Liz hadn't expected such a question. Oh, nothing much. Grew up in London, as you probably know. Came to the States to study and decided to stay. I met Lincoln when he was in the Senate and we married after his wife died, she said. What about family? Any brothers or sisters? Asked Oscar. Liz shook her head. No family, she said. Mom and Dad died in an accident, and I was left an only child. I think I read somewhere that you have a twin sister, said Oscar. Liz shook her head. Fake news, she said. I guess one of those right-wing conspiracy websites keeps attacking my husband as a globalist. Oscar thought. He finished putting his things away and joined Liz in the main part of the bedroom. So, are you going to be my chaperone while I'm here? He asked. Liz laughed and nodded her head. As a matter of fact, yes, she said. And I'll be expecting you at dinner tonight at 7 p.m. Sharp. I look forward to it, Oscar said. Now, if you don't mind, I have some work to do. Very well, Oscar, she said. I have things to do too, but I expect to see you at dinner. And feel free to dress up if you'd like. Smiling, she left the room, leaving Oscar wondering why she had lied to him. How deeply she was involved in all of this, he asked himself. Chapter 6. So, what did you find out? Asked Mona to her sister. I think he knows a lot more than he's saying, replied a flustered Liz. He's been asking about my sister, so I'm sure he knows we're related. That means he's going to be very careful around you in the future, Mona said. We're going to have to act fast. He's having dinner with me tonight. Do you think I should spike his food? Asked Liz. No, he'll be on guard. Just relax, let me handle it. Don't give him any unnecessary reason to suspect you. Remember, the target isn't him. It's your husband. I want you to distract him as much as possible. Can you do that for me, sis? Asked Mona. Of course, replied Liz. Okay, thanks, sis. Love you, said Mona. Love you too, said Liz and hung up. Oscar, meanwhile, had managed to have a brief meeting with Kyle Bumstead, the senior Secret Service agent at the White House. Kyle had just finished talking to Nina Carlisle's and was not at all pleased. So, Warren, tell me, did you have anything to do with these new agents showing up on my doorstep? He asked when they met. I have no idea what you're talking about, Oscar replied to the red-faced man whose shaved head reminded him of a .45 caliber bullet. I just got off the phone with Treasury. They gave me a bunch of pledges and told me to put them on the president's staff. Heck, that's my job, not theirs, he said. Let me tell you something, Warren. This is my house, and I take my job very seriously. I'm sorry, Bumstead, but I thought this was the people's house, Oscar said. Kyle turned even redder than before and sunk his gaze into Oscar's face. It is the people's house, as you say, but my job is to make it the safest in the whole goddamn world, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm not going to have a bunch of unknown, untested newbies hanging around here looking for the nearest restroom when the shit hits the fan. Got it? He asked, spitting saliva in Oscar's face. Yeah, got it, Oscar said, wiping his face with his handkerchief. And for that matter, I'm here to work with you. Really? Kyle said. How? Oscar briefly told Kyle about the situation with MMA's, Liz, and her twin sister Mona. He also told Kyle that the task force now believed Nina was part of a conspiracy to get the president. Damn, Kyle said when Oscar finished. So you believe these new agents I got are really part of the whole goddamn thing? I think it's a very real possibility, Oscar said. So what do you want from me? Asked Kyle. More than anything, we need intelligence. I know my boss has talked to you about our off-site backup team, and we appreciate your help. But we need to somehow intercept communications to and from the First Lady. Can you help us with that? Asked Oscar. Kyle looked a little nervous before saying anything else. He looked around for a few seconds, then turned to Oscar. I've been talking to your Bill Jackson. Quite an impressive man, Kyle said. And yes, I think we can help you with the other one. I hope you'll be straight with me about all this shit. Oscar nodded his head. Absolutely. I wouldn't have it any other way, he said. Okay, Warren, I'll read it to you on the way to the communications office. But remember, everything I tell you is strictly classified. I've already checked, so I know you're authorized to hear it. Understood? He asked. Of course, Oscar replied. Lead the way. Chapter 7. On the way to the communications department, Kyle told Oscar about the department's capabilities, which included highly classified information about equipment designed to intercept, track, and record cell phone conversations. Most of the technical details were beyond Oscar's comprehension, but he understood the basic principles and how it worked. So, can it be set up to scan and intercept calls made from, say, burner phones? Asked Oscar. Absolutely, said Kyle. In fact, we tap phones like that all the time. With all the civilian traffic in the White House, tours and things like that, we've set the system to trigger on certain keywords. The recording won't start until those keywords are detected, but the metadata of each call is recorded. Of course, all official phone calls are conducted using secure and encrypted devices. Do you think they'll use regular cell phones for that? I think so, Oscar said. Something tells me they know that standard encrypted forms of communication here will be monitored and recorded, so they're circumventing that by keeping things simple and relatively low-tech. Whatever you say, he said. They reached the secure communications area, and Kyle let them inside using his keycard. Once inside, he walked over to the equipment box and began flipping switches. Once seated at the computer, he began clicking buttons and entering commands. Oscar was not interested in this, but he got a general idea of what was going on. Soon a diagram appeared on the large monitor. There were several red dots on it, which Oscar realized indicated cell phones that had recently been used. Kyle manipulated the diagram, and they noticed that one dot was on the top floor, the First Lady's office. Kyle clicked on the dot, and a wealth of information popped up on the screen. Is this phone currently in use? Asked Oscar. It appears not, replied Kyle. It looks like a call was made from it a few minutes ago. And from the data, it looks like several other calls were made from this phone over the past few days. And all the calls were to the same number. Could it really be that simple? Oscar wondered. Can we use this data to determine the location of the other phone? He asked. It'll take a little time, maybe an hour or two, but we'll be able to locate it, at least to the nearest tower, Kyle said. Can you set it to record any further conversations? Asked Oscar. Kyle nodded his head. Already did, he said. I've also enabled tracking on both phones and prioritized them. Give me your phone and I'll install an app so you can monitor them remotely. Oscar unlocked his phone and handed it to Kyle. Kyle did his magic and handed the phone back to Oscar. Now you can monitor both phones yourself. Both numbers have been programmed so you'll know where they are too within a few yards, Kyle said. Great, Kyle, thanks, Oscar said. I'll alert my men. That's a big help. I'm just doing my job, Warren. I'm here to keep the president safe. I don't care about cheating spouses, but I get upset when my president or his family is in danger. And I do get upset when I find out there's a plot being hatched in this house, he said. And you're welcome, by the way, he added with a thin smile. Tell me something, Kyle, Oscar said. Are the rumors about President Skaggs true? Kyle grinned. You're obviously not from around these parts, he said. Hell, everyone here knows Lincoln Skaggs is one of the biggest pussies on the hill, if not the biggest. If she's got a skirt on, he's after her. Personally, I don't get it. Have you seen the First Lady? If I were married to her, I'd never even think of another woman. But it's not my job to raise him. I'm his protector, not his confessor. Maybe you can talk some sense into him. Yes, I understand, Oscar said. The First Lady is a very attractive woman. Attractive, yes, Kyle said. Chaste? Not so much. She's been known to have oddities from time to time. Maybe they have one of those open marriages, you know? Just be careful when you have dinner with her tonight, and keep your cool. You know about her dinner invitation? Asked Oscar. Kyle smiled. It's my job to know what goes on in this house, he said. Of course it is, Oscar smiled. So, what's the president's schedule for the next couple days? The usual meetings and such, but tomorrow night he has a fundraiser with the party leaders, Kyle said. That's probably when they'll make their move, Oscar said. Hopefully we can get Mona by then. Kyle nodded in agreement. I think you're right, he said. I'll send my best agents to her. Thanks, Kyle. We'll keep each other informed. By the way, do you think you can get us into the president's briefing? Asked Oscar. Kyle looked up the president's schedule and found a free time only 45 minutes away. Yeah, I think we can get in for a short 5 to 10 minute meeting. But no more than that, he said. That will work out. See you then, Oscar said. They shook hands and went their separate ways. Chapter 8. After his meeting with Kyle, Oscar called Bill and told him what he and Kyle had accomplished. Bill was beyond excited. Great job, Oscar, he said. I'll get some teams ready and we'll spring into action when you have a better idea of Mona's whereabouts. I'm inclined to agree that they'll probably move tomorrow night. Let me know when you have more information, and for God's sake, be careful with the First Lady tonight. Yes, thanks, Dad, Oscar said wryly. Bill laughed. I'll talk to you later. Oscar put the phone away and glanced at the time. He was a couple hours away from dinner with Liz and just under half an hour away from meeting with the president. That was just enough time to get back to Lincoln's bedroom and send a text to his kids to let them know he was okay. He met Kyle outside the Oval Office, and they entered the office together. President Skaggs finished talking as they entered and walked up to meet them. Kyle, Officer Warren, he said, smiling. What can I do for you gentlemen tonight? Mr. President, Kyle said, Officer Warren and I would like to update you on the progress of his investigation into MMAs, and I thought you should hear it from both of us. The president nodded his head and gestured to the couches in the study. Mr. President, I don't know how else to say this, so I'll just speak up, Oscar said. It seems the First Lady is involved in this case, and the female lawyer at the head of it all, Mona Larson, is actually her twin sister. The president looked somewhat shocked by this revelation. Are you sure about that, Officer Warren? He asked. It's an incredible accusation you're making. I know it is, Mr. President, but our people have double-checked the records in London and with our own immigration authorities, and the information we pulled from Pat Witherspoon's files confirms it, Oscar said. Kyle entered the conversation. We also discovered several calls made from a civilian cell phone from the First Lady's quarters to a phone located somewhere in Georgetown. After Officer Warren and I met with him, our office was able to trace that phone to within a 2-mile radius of the Georgetown Tower, he said. We have reason to believe that whatever is about to happen is likely to happen somewhere around tomorrow night's fundraiser. I see, the president said. How sure are you about all of this? Kyle and Oscar looked at each other. Oscar nodded to Kyle, giving him the floor. I'd give it a high degree of probability, sir, he said. President Skaggs looked at Oscar. What are your men doing? He asked. We're preparing to put troops on the ground, Mr. President. All we are waiting for is the location, Oscar said. Very good, Lincoln said. Good work, gentlemen. Thank you. Both men realized the meeting was over and got up to leave. President Skaggs waved at Oscar before he reached the door. Kyle nodded and walked out of the office. Officer Warren, I understand you have a dinner planned with the First Lady tonight, the president said. Yes, sir. Scheduled, Oscar replied. Just between you and me, you see, man to man. I just wanted to let you know that she really likes you, the president said. Mr. President, I assure you, Oscar began, but Lincoln waved him away. Oscar, don't worry. Liz and I have a certain, well, understanding. I have my relationship. She has hers. Oh yeah, I know all about them and she knows all about mine. We just don't rub each other's noses in it. You do find her attractive, don't you? Asked Lincoln. Yes, sir. I find the First Lady a very attractive woman, but I assure you, especially under the circumstances, I have no intention of making any advances toward her, said Oscar. She is now under suspicion, and besides, I still have feelings for my ex-wife. Lincoln smiled and put his hand on Oscar's shoulder. You are an honorable man, Oscar. I wish there were more people like you. There would probably be a lot less divorces in this country, Lincoln said with a smile. Enjoy your dinner, please, and thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. President, Oscar said, shaking his hand. He walked out of the office and caught up with Kyle. That went well, Oscar said. Kyle nodded in agreement. I see you've located Mona's cell phone. Yeah, it just came in before our meeting, Kyle said. I've already texted your phone so your people can take action. Kyle looked at Oscar as they approached Lincoln's bedroom. Be very careful with the First Lady, Oscar, he said. Remember, she's now a suspect and a potential threat to the president. If you feel threatened, send me a text to 911. I'll have a team on standby. Thank you, Kyle, Oscar said. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Chapter 9. Oscar showered and dressed for dinner with Liz. He held the capsule in his hands and contemplated whether to take it. The technicians at Fort Apache had developed it after getting information from Pat's files about the many compounds MMAs like to use. They explained that it couldn't be completely effective against everything, but should greatly reduce the effects of anything they could use against it. They also said that for maximum protection, it should be taken at least 30 minutes before exposure. He glanced at his watch and decided to take his chances. He swallowed the pill and headed outside. Soon he was already knocking on Liz's door. Come in, she said. Oscar opened the door and walked in. Liz made the best of it. The diffused light was dimmed and the elegantly set table was illuminated by the soft light of candles. Liz came out in a white robe. She was the epitome of adorable. Too bad she's a suspect, Oscar thought, and married to the president. Liz walked over to the table. I hope you like my outfit, she said. I picked it out especially for you. Please join me. Oscar walked across the room and, as befitted a gentleman, pulled up a chair for her and sat her down, as he had done so many times for Renee. She sat down and smiled. A gentleman, I see. I rarely see that these days, she said, smiling. Thank you. My pleasure, ma'am, he said, returning her smile. He sat down across from her, and an orderly wheeled a cart up to the table. He set the lunches in front of them and ceremoniously removed the polished silver covers, exposing a nice piece of meat and a well-cooked lobster tail. Then he poured some champagne into the flutes. Oscar noticed that a few tiny pellets had settled to the bottom of his flute, which would probably have gone unnoticed to the untrained eye. Closing the bottle, the attendant smiled and bowed, wishing them a pleasant evening. Oscar waited until the man left the room before saying something. It looks absolutely marvelous, he said. You certainly did your best. Liz smiled at hearing the compliment. I'm glad you approve, she said, taking a sip of champagne. Tell me something, Liz, if you don't mind, said Oscar. Sure, anything, Oscar, she said, taking a bite of a piece of lobster. What would your husband say if he saw us now? He asked. Liz laughed. He'd probably tell us to enjoy our vacation and ask us to be quiet, she said. Let me explain. Lincoln and I have an understanding. We love each other very much, but we both have very high libidos. So he has his affairs and I have mine. We know all about them, and everything is fine as long as we don't rub each other's noses in it. I don't know how he manages it, Oscar said. If I were married to you, there's no way I'd share with you like that. Maybe it's just my Midwestern upbringing. I'm flattered, Oscar. I really am, she said. I know you probably won't approve, but it's so much better than peeping on each other. I've done that too, and it's no fun at all, constantly wondering if you're going to get caught and wondering what might happen when it all comes out. And believe me, in the circles that Lincoln and I run in, almost everyone is doing someone else. That way, there won't be any hard feelings and no one gets hurt. That's not my experience, Oscar said. From what I've seen, someone always ends up getting hurt. Maybe they're just taking the wrong approach, she said. Since we're bearing our souls here, I have one confession to make. What's that? Asked Oscar. I lied about not having a twin sister. I have a twin, but we were separated when we were very young. I don't know where she is or what happened to her, she said. You know, technically lying to a federal officer is a felony, Oscar said, smiling. Liz laughed. I guess we'll have to see what the court says, she joked. I didn't know I was being questioned, and I certainly don't remember you reading me my rights. Right, Oscar said. The phone rang. Oscar picked it up, noticed the incoming number, and looked at Liz. Excuse me, please. Duty calls me. Absolutely, she said. Hey, Bill, what's up? Asked Oscar. We caught Mona, said Bill. Unfortunately, she's already dead. What happened? Asked Oscar. We got a good lock on her location. The officers approached and she pulled a gun on them, said Bill. They had no choice but to take her down. From what I heard, she was shot in the stomach. She held on for a little while but didn't make it. Before she died, she managed to get Liz, Nina Carlisle's, and a few others involved. I guess that's it, Oscar said, watching Liz closely. Pretty much, yes, Bill said. Are you still on your date with the First Lady? Yes, Oscar said. Good. Let me know when you've dealt with that issue, Bill said. I will, Oscar replied and hung up. After ending the call, Oscar sent a message to Kyle. Stand by. Watch the video for a signal. He received an immediate reply. Copy that. Oscar turned on the phone's camera, set it up so the video would be broadcast to Kyle, put the phone in his pocket, and turned to Liz. Sorry for the slight hiccup, Oscar said. No problem, Liz replied. I understand when duty calls. Oscar nodded. Interesting that you mentioned your sister, he said. Liz flinched. Well, you know, Mona Larson. Turns out she did something really bad. You see, she pulled a gun on federal officers and basically got shot. I'm told she was shot in the stomach. A bad way to go if you want my opinion. But before she died, she blamed you, Nina Carlisle's and others. I guess she figured if she went down, the others would go down with her. You bastard, Liz growled, her face reddening. Did you know Mona was my sister? Yes, Liz, I confirmed it today, Oscar said. You know, I was going to give you the best night of your life, she said. Oscar raised his flute. I suspect it would have been the last night of my life, too, he said. Am I right? You know, you really should cover up a bit. You see, any minute now, a bunch of federal agents are going to come through that door and arrest you. I don't think you're going to want to put your body on display for CNN, do you? Before I arrest you, Liz, I'd like an answer to just one question, said Oscar. To what? Said Liz, closing her robe and shoving her hands in her pockets. Why? Asked Oscar. You've had everything. You're married to the most powerful man on earth. You could pick any man you wanted, basically. You had everything. That's easy, Mr. Midwest values with children, she said wryly. Power. In Washington, it's all about power. I loved my sister, but she reveled in it. She became an ideologue. She wanted to change the whole society. I just wanted power, and I would have had it until you came along. At that moment, she took her hands out of her pockets, opened the vial she had hidden in her robe, and swallowed it. At the same time, she grabbed Oscar's flute and drank the entire glass of champagne. Her face immediately turned white, and her eyes bulged. Before Oscar could react, she had already fallen to the floor. Get in here quickly, Oscar ordered, directing his voice to the phone. The doors immediately swung open, and federal agents led by Kyle rushed into the room, but it was too late. By the time they were at the desk, Liz was already dead. Kyle put on latex gloves and picked up the empty vial. He put it in an evidence bag and handed it to Oscar. Whatever it is, you know she meant it for you, he said. Oscar nodded. I know, he said. I'll have our lab analyze it and let you know the results. Thank you. I'd appreciate it, Kyle said. By this time, Lincoln Skaggs had entered the room. Seeing his wife's body on the floor, he burst into tears. Did you have to kill her? He asked Oscar. She did it herself, Oscar replied. I have a videotape of her confession. Would you like to see it? Lincoln shook his head. No, he said. He held her head against his for a moment before Kyle lifted it back up. Mr. President, we don't know what she used to commit suicide, but it appears to be a fast-acting drug. It would be best if you don't touch her body until we're sure it's safe, he said. The president nodded his head in understanding, then turned to Oscar. Has the threat passed? Did everyone else get caught? He asked. Her sister was shot while resisting arrest, Oscar said. She pulled a gun on federal agents. The others are being rounded up now. As far as I know, the threat has been neutralized. Thank you, Oscar, he said quietly, and left the room. Oscar informed Kyle about dinner and got ready to leave. Kyle reached out and shook his hand. You know, if you ever get tired of chasing promiscuous wives, come find me, he said. Oscar smiled. Thanks, Kyle, I appreciate that. It was a pleasure working with you, he said. Oscar returned to the Lincoln bedroom and called Bill to update him on the evening's events. Good job, Oscar, Bill said. We'll take it from here. But right now, you need to get back to base. What's going on? Asked Oscar. It's Renee, and it's serious, said Bill. That was all Oscar needed to hear. He gathered his clothes, took one last look around the room, and hit the road. A few hours later, he arrived at Fort Apache and met Bill, who escorted him to the secure medical center. Oscar, Bill began, Renee has been diagnosed with a very aggressive brain cancer. I didn't mention it before because I needed you to focus on your work. It was discovered during a 6-month scan. From what I was told, she has a few days, maybe a couple weeks, and she asked for you. What the hell? Asked Oscar. Didn't they notice it sooner? There were no signs 6 months ago, said Bill. A few months ago, she started complaining of headaches, so they gave her the usual medication, but they got worse. Whatever it was, it started showing aggression more recently. By this time, they had reached Renee's room. The children were already there and waiting for their father before entering the room. Renee had lost weight, her eyes seemed sunken, and her skin had taken on a yellowish tint. Oscar walked over to her bed and took her hand. Oscar, she whispered, smiling. I'm so glad you were able to come. I'm sorry, but I don't think I'll get to see the kids graduate. You'll do fine, he said, trying to cheer her up. It didn't work. She shook her head. No, baby, it won't, she said. But I want to clear the air before I go. What do you mean? Asked Oscar. I need to tell you something before I go. You have been the best husband and father a woman could ever wish for. I love you so much, and yet I have hurt you so much. I'm so sorry, she said, and tears streamed down her face. Okay, Renee, I know that MMA has ruined your mood, Oscar said. Renee shook her head and cried even harder. No, Oscar, I need to say something and I know it's going to hurt, but I can't take it to the grave. I need to get it out. Before I went on that retreat, I cheated on you. Several times. I don't know why I did it, but I'm sorry. Will you ever be able to forgive me? She asked. Oscar couldn't believe what he was hearing. He never would have thought that Renee would cheat on him, and here she was admitting it herself. Hot tears streamed down his face. He stood up and looked at Bill, shaking his head. Children, go talk to your mother, he told them, inviting Bill and the doctor out into the hallway. Is it possible she's hallucinating? Asked Oscar. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. Impossible to say, he told Oscar. We know she's been fed all sorts of mind-altering chemicals, so anything's possible. The important thing is that it's real to her, so at least in her mind it really happened. Is there anything that can be done? Asked Oscar. The doctor shook his head. No, Oscar, nothing, he said. This thing is growing even now. I've never seen anything like it. It's literally consuming her brain cells, and it's doing it faster and faster. Frankly, I'm surprised she can even speak. How long does she have left? Asked Bill. Yesterday, I would have said a few days or weeks. Right now, I think we're talking a few hours, if not more. Her body is already shutting down, and soon her entire brain will be consumed. I don't think she'll survive the night, he said. Frankly, she may not live to have this conversation. Bill looked at Oscar. Well, my friend, you have a big decision to make. Do you love her enough to forgive her? He asked. Oscar knew he loved her enough to possibly take another chance on her, but that was before this revelation. But what could he do? Divorce her? He'd already done that. Kill her? She was already dying and could die any minute. She'd already been thrown in jail. And he knew that if he didn't forgive her, it could be a stumbling block in his relationship with his children, who were now crying as they said goodbye to her. Damn, he thought. Why had she done this? But, he reasoned, there was a possibility that it was a false memory embedded by MAs. He looked at Bill and made his decision. Returning to the room, he regarded his ex-wife, who was now looking at him with eyes that begged for mercy. She had suffered and was suffering now. He decided not to add to her pain. Renee, you gave me many years of happiness, 2 wonderful children, and despite everything that has happened, I forgive you, he said, crying. Renee sobbed at his words, as did the children, who hugged her as tightly as they could. After a few minutes, Renee asked to take the children out into the hallway. Oscar pulled her against him and cried as he heard her whisper, I love you, and I'm sorry. He heard a sound like a death rattle and then nothing. He looked at her face and realized she had passed away. He kissed her forehead and put her back in the bed. I'm sorry, Oscar, Bill said. Look, we'll take care of everything. We'll have to do an autopsy first, but the task force will pay for her funeral. Oscar nodded, gathered up the kids, and headed home in a daze. Epilogue. The autopsy revealed that Renee's brain condition was the result of the experimental drugs Pat had administered to her that weekend on vacation. It appeared that the tumor had existed for some time, but was so small that previous scans had not detected it. Renee was buried in Oscar's family plot with the inscription, Loving Wife and Mother. Oscar wouldn't tell his family everything she had done, but they knew she had spent time in prison for trying to kill him. For the sake of the children, he decided to spare them the gruesome details. The news reported that the First Lady had died of a sudden stroke. The nation mourned her loss, and the media showed a video of a grieving President Skaggs. The video of him shedding tears at her grave caused his popularity to rise among family values supporters, and even former opponents were reluctant to criticize a man mourning the death of his wife. No doubt, Oscar thought, he would surely be re-elected. Lab tests of the chemical she had ingested showed that it was an enhanced version of what Renee had used against him. No wonder she died so quickly, Oscar thought to himself. There were also reports of an unidentified woman who had been shot and killed while resisting arrest by federal agents. Oscar knew it was Mona Larson, but her name had never been mentioned, nor had her connection to the late First Lady and the plot against President Skaggs. Bill was thrilled with the result, but informed Oscar that the cleanup operation could drag on for several years. Not only that, he said that some copycats had already begun to act. Oscar's friend also had another surprise for him. Oscar, you really need to find a good woman. Maybe you should look at that new girl who works in the legal department, Rita, said Bill. Why? Asked Oscar.
And
Because she's heard a lot about you and she really likes you, said Bill. And how do you know that? Asked Oscar. Well, said Bill, she's my daughter, and it just so happens that she's about your age, and I happen to know that she's single and really wants to meet you. You dog, Oscar said, laughing. Are you really trying to set me up with your daughter? Bill laughed and held out a piece of paper to Oscar. Give her a call, he said. She's looking forward to your call. Now don't make a liar out of me. Okay, Oscar said in annoyance. I'll call. Good, Bill said. Just one thing, okay? What? Asked Oscar. I'd really like to have grandchildren someday, said Bill with a smile. Oscar laughed. He called and met Rita, who turned out to be a wonderful, caring woman who adored children. After meeting for a while, they fell in love, and the kids fell in love with her too. Eventually, they were married, with Oscar's children acting as best man and maid of honor. At least, Oscar reasoned, he wouldn't have to hide his work from her. And it turned out that soon after the honeymoon, Bill would fulfill his wish sooner than he expected. The end. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.